This is the story and operation of the most challenging job on the Columbia and Western Model Railroad, the Kraft Switcher. But first, a bit of background. The Canadian Pacific Southern Main Line across British Columbia stretched from Lethbridge, Alberta to Hope, BC, in an attempt to cut American railways, notably James Hill's Great Northern Railway, off from the mineral wealth of southern BC. The Boundary Subdivision ran between Nelson, BC, and Midway, with the important junction of Castlegar 30 miles to the west of Nelson. On the prototype, the Kraft Switcher leaves the division point of Nelson every morning, heads to Castlegar to switch the area, and returns in the evening. What makes the job so challenging on the Columbia and Western is not only the large number of cars that the Kraft Switcher has to switch, but also where it operates. Castlegar is the junction between the Roslyn and Boundary subdivisions, and nearly every train on the railroad moves through that junction, so the Kraft Switcher has to be out of the way of those trains. The Kraft Switcher's name comes from the Castlegar Kraft Mill to the west of Castlegar, which takes wood fiber product and ships rayon pulp for use in making fabric. On the model, the industry ships and receives more than 24 cars per day, and it makes up the lion's share of the work of the Kraft Switcher. The Columbia and Western Model Railroad has been in operation now for nearly 10 years. Over many operating sessions, I've watched operators tackle the craft job in a variety of different ways, mostly successfully. In this series of videos, I'd like to show you one way you can go about running the craft job and give you some helpful hints along the way. First, a little bit more about the prototype Canadian Pacific Boundary Subdivision, so named for the region which runs up against the American international boundary. It begins at the division point of Nelson on the picturesque Kootenay Lake and travels along Kootenay River to the west to the junction with the Slocan River and the Slocan Subdivision which runs north. At the end of the Slocan Subdivision is Slocan City and a large Triangle Pacific sawmill. This mill originates wood chips which are left by the Slocan way freight at the junction town of South Slocan. The Kraft Switcher job will pick these wood chips up and bring them to the mill at Kraft. The Boundary Subdivision continues to follow the Kootenay River to the junction with the Columbia River at Castlegar. The Roslyn Subdivision heads south along the Columbia River to the smelter town of Trail. Meanwhile, the Boundary Subdivision continues to run west over Farron Summit to the mill towns of Grand Forks and Midway, which both originate wood chips for the Castlegar pulp mill. The Castlegar pulp mill is located just to the west of Castlegar at Kraft. We begin our journey today in Nelson Yard on the banks of Kootenay Lake. We'll pick up our power, H-liners 817 and 818, on the ready tracks at the east end of the diesel house. The Kraft Switcher is officially number 87, running westward to Castlegar every morning. It returns in the afternoon as an extra. Having picked up our clearances, we're off to go get our train, which is waiting for us on the arrival departure tracks. The tags you see on the rolling stock are the waybills that tell the crews where each car is headed and where the cars need to be switched to. We even tag the cabooses because the cabooses are assigned to each conductor who's assigned to each train. And that way the yard crews know which caboose to add for which train. We'll take the bypass track past the diesel house. The Nelson West Switcher has some work to do, so we'll stop here and wait for it to pass. With the switcher in the clear, we'll couple up to our train on arrival departure track number 2, pump air, and get ready to depart. Our route today is the same as every other day. We'll depart westbound along Kootenay River, cross the river at Tegum about 5 miles outside of Nelson, and enter South Slocan Junction. Here we'll pick up some wood chip hoppers left by the Slocan way freight, cross the Slocan River Bridge, and enter Castlegar. We'll spend the majority of the day in Castlegar. Our train was made up first by the yard crew at the last operating session. It helps tremendously to have the Kraft Switcher job properly blocked before it departs Nelson. This includes having the loaded chip hoppers at the front of the train, followed by a contiguous block of box cars for the pulp mill and the other cars for the pulp mill, then the Pope and Talbot cars, and then finally bringing up the rear, the miscellaneous cars for the other industries around Castlegar. The yard switcher is working the clean-out tracks at the far west end of the yard. We're clearing yard limits and we're on our way. The CPR's fourth crossing of the Kootenay River is at Tegum. This is a long series of bridges, which includes through plate girder bridges, a through truss, a deck plate girder bridge, and actually even a couple of islands in between. The through truss span on the west end of the bridge is the most picturesque spot, and most prototype photographs are taken here. Yes, that's an osprey nest on top of the bridge. It's one of its spotting features. There's a lot of osprey in the area, and the CPR puts up special platforms for them to nest in so they're not nesting in the telegraph wires. And a very short distance after the Tegum Bridge, we enter the small junction town of South Slocan. The majority of South Slocan Junction is actually located on a swing gate. Here we see 3 empty wood chip hoppers on that swing gate that have been set out for the Slocan way freight to take north to the Triangle Forest Products Mill. This swing gate crosses the main aisle and allows the Slocan subdivision to branch off the Boundary Sub, cross the aisle, and enter the main peninsula area of the layout. Inside that peninsula are both the Slocan subdivision and above it the Castle subdivision. These two subdivisions are actually bridged by way of a rail barge. Trains are loaded onto a rail barge at Slocan City and then manually lifted up to the upper layer, which is the Castlegar subdivision. We'll stop briefly at South Slocan and pick up some cars that were left for us by the Slocan way freight yesterday. Our pickups include 3 chip hoppers of chips that will make their way to the pulp mill, and a log bunk which will make its way to the sawmill. The boxcar behind our pickups is sitting on the team track. It's an empty which will go to Nelson so that it can be reallocated. We'll pick it up on our return trip this afternoon. We reassemble our train, whistle off, and continue making our way to Castlegar. We're approaching the Slocan River Bridge. Just north of it is the Highway 3A bridge. The salmon fishing is great here. It's also a very popular place for rail fans. On the prototype, the bridge entering Castlegar is actually the bridge across the Columbia River. It's a huge bridge with many spans, and I didn't have room to model it, so I've had to make do with the Slocan River Bridge. This is our view as we enter Castlegar. It's a junction between the Roslyn Subdivision and the Boundary Subdivision. The station sits in the middle of the Y. The Roslyn Subdivision heads off to the left, down south to Tadnak, which is a large Kaminko smelter, and the Warfield fertilizer plant. The Boundary Subdivision is heading off to the right, which is what we're taking. We stopped briefly as we entered Castlegar, so our head-end brakeman could jump down and run in front of us to set the switch so that we could take the siding. In the midpoint of the siding is a crossover, which is very convenient. This crossover allows direct connection between the yard, which is on the south leg of the Y, and all the trackage that leads to the sawmill and pulp mill. The crossover also allows us to break our train in two and to run around different parts of it. We'll see how convenient that is in part 2 of this video series.